Tell me a bit about what prompted you to write that open letter to our governor, Governor Cox.
Well, I always follow news, especially news that has to do with my community, the sex worker community, the pornographic community. And this has been on my radar, not just as something that might affect adult content creators, but as something that's actually a much bigger, in my opinion, free speech issue. So for me, I think it came to my attention because it was related to my profession, but it got me riled up because I feel like things like this, bills like this, restrictions like this, don't just restrict users, people, you know, Utahns or however you call it.
Utahns.
Utahns. I wasn't sure. I was like, well, it's Californians. They don't just restrict you from watching something that I think a lot of people could agree to not watch, like porn, but that can create a real slippery slope of losing freedoms. I mean, I feel like if you were to replace the word pornography with something a little less controversial, like conservative news, people might feel the emotions of what's happening a little more seriously. And I think, even though that sounds like a wide gap, I think that with some of the more recent news events that we've been seeing, that gap is closing. Look at what people have done, you know, especially to conservatives. A lot of people have felt silenced. A lot of people have felt that the government, or, you know, in some cases companies, are putting too many restrictions on our freedoms of speech. And I think that if you allow something like this to pass, actually pass in government, that really can set a pretty frightening precedent for everything else. So many questions come up. Who is going to say what is pornographic? Sports Illustrated, XXX, Snapchat? Do you know what I mean? Where there's so many levels of controversy I can see in this. With the one that people should be the most concerned about is they've taken away something from perhaps adult performers. What's next? And how far do we push that envelope? Many countries already have drastic governmental restrictions on the content that can be viewed in the internet. And I feel like this is just that first baby step towards a society when we are going to allow our government institutions to dictate what we can and cannot watch.
You kind of alluded to this a bit in your answer there. Does it shock or surprise you at all that a Republican governor in a largely Republican conservative state such as Utah, that these conservative lawmakers would pass something as restrictive as this after most recently complaining about the attacks of their free speech from shutting down social media sites like Parler, or the former president's departure from social media platforms such as Twitter?
Yeah, or even the Dr. Seuss controversy. I think those are all things that should have opened people's eyes to, hey, this is something I like now. It was only fun when it was something I was willing to let go. And we really need to take those blinders off of even things that I'm using or I'm not using, and just think and pause for a moment about what free speech, you know, in America means, and what chipping away at it means, even if it's things that a large percentage of society might be willing to chip away at. I think the precedent is dangerous.
What about that argument that, hey, we have to protect our children? Our children are exposed to this. Why not take these steps to try and limit their exposure to pornographic material?
I agree. Children should absolutely not, for a multitude of reasons, be consuming any type of pornographic material. It's completely inappropriate. And steps should be taken to protect children from seeing that information. I think it becomes complicated now that we have not just cell phones, but the internet in general. And since we as a country have decided not to censor the internet, where does the burden of that censorship lie? And in my opinion, that burden lies with the parents. just like it did when I was young. There were many types of materials that my parents, and it changed. The things that I was not allowed to watch at 2 years old was not the same as when I was 6, 10, 12, 15. And so it is up to our own moral compasses in our communities and within our families to decide what materials of all kinds our children should be exposed to, whether that's certain types of movies, whether they're adult in nature or not. I've seen things on Netflix that I wouldn't show anyone under 18 years old. You know, there's a wide variety of content and opinions that we need to protect our children from. And I would agree with an educational program if there are concerns about parents. You know, I know as a 42-year-old woman, I'm not as tech savvy as my young nieces. You know, I recognize that it can be hard to keep up with young people and their, you know, immense ability to use this technology. But if we are going to say, yes, you can use the computer, tablet, cell phone, access to the internet, it is up to us as adults to learn how to protect our children from those things. And if we do not feel like we have the necessary tools that it takes to navigate the internet, then we maybe can, as a government, help provide those resources. We could maybe, you know, ask our friends, or if we really just do not know how to keep our children safe in the massive, you know, internet landscape, then perhaps until we do have those skills as an individual parent, we could not let our children hold that device until we know that they're safe. It's like, I have this hand grenade, I don't really know how to use it, I'm not that worried about training, all the other kids have one, heck with it, let's just give it out. You know, that seems egregiously irresponsible. So does the government should the government parent and censor our children? That, I think, is a massive societal question. And so far, we as a country have said, no, the government should not parent our children. We can do that in our churches and our schools and our communities and our families, and let free speech be free speech, so that one video game that Joe's parents let him play is not going to be played by the kid down the street. Does that mean the video game shouldn't exist? No, it just means we need to uphold our own moral standards carefully in our own households and communities. And I would support something that would fund or help those non-tech savvy parents or maybe undereducated parents learn those skills, because you're correct, in this time those skills are necessary. But I don't think that we need to build, you know, a skyscraper-esque fence around our swimming pool. Perhaps we could just, you know, have a lifeguard or a little education. It seems since I just would like to add that the filters, even if they were implemented, wouldn't keep pornography out of children's hands. Because I think a lot of us have been to countries that have outlawed porn, or even been to a cafe that doesn't allow you to pull up certain types of content on your phone, and we all know you still can. So
yeah, I guess that's
another point too. It just, for all of those reasons, even if you did 10 minutes of research, you would know that 1, the filters don't work. 2, we have free speech in America. 3, I don't want the government parenting our children. And doesn't that all just make it seem like you're attacking something else? If the bill that you create won't even do what you want it to do, what is it doing? And more importantly, I would love to ask the question of, who is it benefiting? That's always, to me, a very interesting question. And I wonder maybe who are the people providing the filters? I'm not sure. This is complete, you know, conjecture at this point, but people, there's only a few reasons to pass a bill like this. And since you know it's not going to help children, is it going to help your career? Is it, you know, putting yourself in a light that you like? I just feel like we're using this dialogue to damage or put down pornography, specifically knowing that it won't help children. So it's very odd to me.
Well, and you are a person that works in the pornography trade.
Yeah.
What insights does that give you, I guess, on the discussion about pornography and access to it?
Yeah, even going into pornography, I knew there was a massive social stigma. I didn't particularly feel or ascribe any of that shame to myself. So for me, in my own personal skin, it was a really comfortable profession to be in. But the longer I get in, the more I notice how the feeling of shame in our culture around sex, sexual activities, and sexual expression really makes people do interesting things, including write bills like this.
Does it surprise you that a bill like this is coming out of the state of Utah?
Well, it doesn't surprise me that a bill like this is coming out of any state at all. I think people have been pushing against pornography for as long as I can remember. There have been fights, with pornography and pornographers about distributing their content for a very long time. So, so these things don't surprise me, but it does surprise me that it could get passed in a moment where I would have thought people on both sides of the aisle would be against limiting free speech. It seems like there's, before you could say, oh, perhaps liberals would be more forgiving and conservatives would be more staunchly opposed. But now I would think that conservatives and liberals would be on the same page because that page is freedom.
Good point. What kind of reaction have you, let me ask you this, have you had a response back from our governor yet?
From the governor, no, but I would personally like to ask Governor Cox not to sign this bill, not for the sake of porn, but I don't think that you want to lead Utah and the country as someone who's one of the first to really get rid of freedom of speech and civil liberties. That doesn't seem like a move any governor should be making ever, especially right now.
And I think you've had some contact, or at least some sort of response from the lawmaker who introduced the bill. Is that correct?
I have, yeah. She's saying that it is for the children, and I believe that she wrote to me that it was for the parents who weren't tech savvy enough to manage content filters on their own, which just seems like a very weak response. It doesn't seem particularly in tune with, any knowledge of the internet, the way filters work, and it seems a little patronizing to me, to parents as well, that they would give their children a device they knew was dangerous without educating themselves on how to protect their child. That seems, yeah, I wouldn't like that if I were a parent in Utah.
Where do we go from here?
I would say don't do it. Let's keep America free. You don't want to be like the countries where the government decides what you can and can't see, what opinions are and are not appropriate. As we know, things are always changing. And when do you put your foot down, if not at the beginning? Do we wait for the water to boil and then say, wow, well, we really pushed too far in that. Look at this horrible situation we're in? No, you stop it immediately, and you stop it staunchly, and you say, no, we are Americans, and this is one of the foundations that our country was built on.
Let's just say, okay, so you have a chance to speak to Utahns here tonight. You have a chance to speak to parents here in Utah. As succinctly as you can, if you can just put it into 10 or 11 words or a sentence, what message do you have for Utahns?
Maintain your freedom of speech, protect your rights as Americans, and do not let this law pass, because you're not just talking about pornography, you're talking about all of your freedoms. Okay.
Was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I'm just glad I got to add anything at all, because usually I write these things when I get worked up and they just sort of float into the ether, but I feel good because, at least I've stood up for my community in whatever way I can. So it really makes me feel happy that I can speak out to more people.
Well, speaking of your community, is this something that has gained attention within the adult film community?
Oh, absolutely. I actually first learned about it through one of the reporters in our industry, Gustav Turner, who writes for XBiz, one of our publications. He's a fantastic journalist and really is on the cutting edge of, freedom of speech issues, and all types of different political people, bills, and opinions that might affect our community and our work. And yeah, he's pretty awesome. So.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys.